Now, what is the Invisible College and why have I set it up? Well, I was actually working on this already for a couple of years before Edge Media ever came along. And the reason for this was that I felt that there was a need for those of us of a like mind to get together and to create a forum and a space for ourselves on the internet where we can share knowledge and experience and bring things together. Because we've heard a lot about how the bad guys are so organized, haven't we? Common purpose and the rest of it. We've heard a lot about how organized and motivated they are to turn us all into slaves. Well, we've got to stand up and do things for ourselves to stop that. And the best way of doing that is through education. And it's by finding out the things they don't want you to know about. The things about yourself, the things about your possibilities, your purpose, your reason for being here, and what will help you in your own life and your own self-development. So I felt it was important to set up the Invisible College to do this. And I've been working on these ideas and everything to do with these things for about 40 years now. So I think I've got a little bit of experience in that field. But I don't count myself as being the only person that knows anything. I want other people to come in as well and share their experience and help us do it together. Now, this has a long history, and it's not something that I've just come up with out of the blue. I'll just have to see how this works. Pressing buttons. There we go. Now, in 1642, the first Invisible College was founded in London. There was an organization called Gresham College. Those of you who know London probably know Gresham Street runs down to the bank. And actually the site of where Gresham College was is now where the NatWest Tower stands, which is kind of a bit of a contradiction if you think about it. But the original Gresham College was set up by Sir Thomas Gresham, who had worked for Queen Elizabeth. And after he died, he left his house to become a college where lectures could be given for free to the people of London to help raise their level of education. And he left stipends for people to become professors at Gresham College who would give these lectures to the people. Well, that side of it didn't really work too well because nobody turned up to the lectures. Isn't that typical of Londoners? They'd rather go to the bear garden and watch bear baiting, or I don't think they had football in those days, but anyway, I suppose not the way we have. Anyway, Gresham College became a focus, though, for free-thinking individuals, and a group of people started meeting there, what they called the Invisible College, and they later on moved on to Oxford. And, oh, I'm going the wrong way. They started meeting at Oxford in the chambers of Bishop John Wilkins. And he was actually the brother-in-law of Oliver Cromwell. He was married to Oliver Cromwell's sister, Robina. But he was a free-thinking individual, and these other guys who came along and got together, they decided what they had to do. This was a very dangerous time, the 1640s. You're in the middle of the Civil War, and people are very fixed in their ideas about religion. You know, are you a Puritan, are you a Catholic, are you Protestant? And also their politics. Are you a royalist? Yeah? Are you a Roundhead? And it was a very, very tense time. And on the continent, it was even worse. They were in the middle of the 30 Years' War, which we never get told about in British history because we weren't too much involved in that. But it was a terrible time. 1/3 of the population of Germany died in that war. It gives you some idea and understanding about it. So it was a tense time for people who were free-thinking. And what these guys decided to do was to leave aside all their politics, all their religion, and to focus on bringing about new knowledge. You have to understand that at that time, in the universities, places like Oxford and Cambridge, what they taught you was the classics. So if you wanted to learn science, what you learnt was Aristotle, because Aristotle knew all about science. So you were allowed to discuss Aristotle, and you could argue about the meaning of this clause here, or that word there, and discuss the way that Aristotle had framed this or that. But you weren't supposed to go out and start measuring the specific gravity of water, or wondering about whether the planets went around the sun, or vice versa. If you did that, you were putting yourself in mortal danger. And Britain was one of the few places that was free enough to allow people to think outside the box. So these people started getting together, and Bishop Wilkins himself had written a book, written several books, I think, but this one on the discovery of a world in the moon. And he had speculated about whether there were people living on the moon and what those people would be like. And you can see from this illustration that he knows very well that the Earth goes round the sun. The sun's at the center of the solar system. And you can also see here, they're not in the right place, but Ceres and Proserpina, that's two of the asteroids. Using telescopes, people have begun to find out that there are other bodies in our solar system besides the planets that everyone had known about up until that time. They hadn't yet discovered Uranus, but they were getting there, you know. But besides being interested in that sort of thing, he was also interested in studying the Bible. And he did research on Noah's Ark and exactly how the animals would have been packed in to Noah's Ark. And this is kind of typical of the period in the 17th century. They didn't just throw away their religion. I said they're not fighting about religion, but the Bible was still considered to be the Word of God. Whoever you were, you're probably a Christian. The Bible's the Word of God. And then there's another, that's one book, and the other book was the book of nature. So they were saying, you study the two books. You know, you study the Word of God, but you also study the book of nature. And by bringing the two together, you bring about wisdom. Come on. Having a bit of slowness here with the computer system. Guys, I think this has happened to us before, isn't it? Yeah? Day of first escape, what will happen? Yeah. Well, there we go, right. Here's some of the other founder members of the First Invisible College. You would know Christopher Wren. This guy was an absolute genius. We know him for rebuilding London, particularly St. Paul's Cathedral, after the Great Fire of 1666. But he was already a professor of mathematics and astronomy before that. And he was considered an absolute genius in his time. He was working out the mathematics of sundials at the age of 14. Next to him, Robert Boyle. Those of you who've done science at O-level will probably remember Boyle's laws. Anyone remember that? P1 V1 over T1 equals P1 V2 over T2. See how these things remain with us even 40 years later? Robert Hooke, Hooke's laws, stretching pieces of wire, tensions on wire and weights and how that affects things. Dr. Seth Ward, professor of astronomy, taught astronomy to Christopher Wren. I think he was Bishop of Salisbury, I think. John Wallis, another eminent mathematician. And John Evelyn, of course, who wrote his diaries. Remember Evelyn's diaries? And was also a great designer of gardens. In fact, I heard him being quoted in, I think, Gardener's Question Time just last week about gardening. So these kind of some of the people, and there were lots of others, who were involved in this first invisible college, bringing about new knowledge and leading to what was called the Enlightenment. And later on, the Invisible College became, after the restoration of Charles II, became the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge, which we now just call the Royal Society. But something happened in the transition. Whereas previously, these gentlemen, as I said, they were studying the Bible. People like Newton, for instance, who was the next generation, wrote more about the Bible, the book of Revelation, and trying to work out the numbers of Daniel than he did about his mathematics, in his Principia, his work on light with prisms, his development of the equations to do with gravity and motion. So they were more rounded personalities. But what seems to have happened towards the end of the 17th century, early 18th century, is that a kind of schism happened between that which was considered scientific, serious. You know, you can measure it, you can get out your tape measure and you can measure this or weigh it. Scientific, unarguable. And that which was considered mystical and probably nonsense. Or that's kind of how people began to view it. And the schism seems to have happened around about, as I say, the early 18th century, around the time of the death of Christopher Wren. He was considered to be the last Grand Master architect, Freemason, before the amalgamation of the lodges in London to form Grand Lodge. And kind of what had been the kind of mystical side of this knowledge that they were pursuing kind of went in that direction, where, as we've been hearing earlier, it becomes subverted by these Illuminati or what have you into our own day. And the scientific only, which is kind of what the Royal Society is now. In fact, I think I'm right in saying that there was a guy who was expelled or sacked from the Royal Society. I think he was a secretary or something of the Royal Society, for daring to say that he believed in guided evolution just recently. You're not allowed to say that. You know, he's starting to bring mysticism in. You mustn't say that. That's religion. That's not allowed. Anyway, but there are antecedents of all of this. And if you look on here, you begin to understand their inspirations. First of all, there's an angel with a trumpet. That's suggesting that this Royal Society they're founding is divinely ordained. Yeah? They wouldn't have an angel now, but there's an angel there, and he's holding a coronet over this bust of Charles II, who was the patron of the Royal Society. And actually, you know, he was a member himself and interested in science. And you see here Robert Murray, who was the first president. He was a Scottish royalist and a great friend of Charles II. In fact, he was buried in Westminster Abbey. And finally, in the bottom right-hand corner there, you see Sir Francis Bacon, who was long dead, but he was the inspiration behind this whole movement for getting new knowledge. He wrote a number of books on the subject of bringing an instauration, as he calls it, of knowledge. And he was very careful. He addressed them to James I, who was the king at the time, in very flattering terms. And basically he made the point that you can't have too much knowledge. That previous to that, it was always thought, you mustn't teach the peasants too much. You know, bad enough that you teach them to read and write. You mustn't let them have too much knowledge, or they'll become agitated and they won't be content with their lot. Well, he kind of said, we need more knowledge, and you can't have too much of it. And he made his point well, and as a result, things began to change. And you see here on the frontispiece of one of his books here, you see a ship between the two pillars there. One is Oxford and the other is Cambridge. But that's actually kind of a skit on something else that he wrote about the need to go beyond the Pillars of Hercules, to sail beyond the ocean, to find out new things, that we should not be hugging the coasts and not learning anything new. So it's kind of a bit of a cartoon, that, and a little bit insulting to those universities, that they're kind of seen as being just like the Pillars of Hercules, holding us back and not going forwards across the Atlantic to this new land of knowledge. And you can see the same thing repeated here with, again, two pillars representing the universities and the ship that sails through and goes beyond to find new knowledge, new inspiration. You've got to remember, this is the time they're starting to explore the new world of America, and they're starting to found colonies over there. So it's kind of was current for them to be thinking in these terms. And he wrote another book called The New Atlantis. It's not saying that he discovered Atlantis, but it's a novel. And it's actually talking about the perfect society that's discovered on this island of Atlantis. And the Atlantean people there have a king called Solomon who's very wise. They know what's going on in the rest of the world because they send out spies to have a look. And everything's working wonderfully well, and they have an enlightened brotherhood who are kind of teaching the way. Actually, what he was really talking about was not Atlantis at all. The island he's talking about was Britain, and how Britain could become the new Atlantis, how Britain could become the place of enlightenment for the new age that he saw as dawning. Now, there were forerunners to this invisible college, and one of the principal inspirations was what's called the Rosicrucian movement of the early 17th century. Now, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Rosicrucian advertisements in magazines, things, mail order. Some of you may have done these mail order courses to the Rosicrucians in America, AMORC. This is nothing to do with that, although I'm sure they claim connections. But in the early 17th century, a number of pamphlets were published, which caused a furore. And they announced to a startled world that a brotherhood was in existence called the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, founded on the teachings of someone who called himself Christian Rosenkreuz, which you can see is probably not a real name, it's a title. Christian Red Cross is what it means. It's a kind of St. George figure, I suppose. But the story goes that as a boy, he went from Germany on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. He got shipwrecked and ended up, instead of going to Jerusalem, going to Damascus, where he was recognized by the Arab people there, and they taught him their knowledge, particularly about medicine, because that's the thing that they're most interested in. And then he traveled around, and you have to understand that at that time, the Islamic world was very much the center for advanced science. Seems strange to us today, but it was then. Europe was still quite sort of backwards, scientifically speaking. And we're talking now about the 15th century. And he came back from his travels to Germany, and according to their pamphlets, he decided he was going to talk to the enlightened people, you know, the professors and the bishops and the doctors, and he would tell them all this new knowledge, and they would be excited, and they would teach their pupils this new knowledge, and it would lead to an instauration and a raising of consciousness and wisdom. But of course, when he tried that, they didn't want to hear. And this is always the way. You go to a professor at a big university, and you just try it. You go up to him and say, "Excuse me, professor," in the nicest possible way. You don't put it quite as bluntly as I'm going to now. You go up to him and you say, "Excuse me, professor, everything you know and you've been teaching is wrong. But I know the right way, and I can teach you a new way of doing things, which is the correct way." Do you think he's going to listen? He's not, is he? I mean, his whole position, his whole status and rank, his salary, everything depends on the fact that he is a master. It took him years to get there. Yeah, he had to put up with all sorts of crap from his bosses and teachers earlier. He's now there sitting in the chair. He's not going to come up, he's not going to listen to a whippersnapper who comes up and says, "You got it wrong, mate." So Christian Rosenkreuz is sent out in his ear. So what he does, is, according to the pamphlets, is he gets together with a group of people and they start a little school of their own. And he teaches them in private the wisdom that he's learnt in the East. And then he dies, or some of them die, they're buried, and their places are taken by new people. Eventually he dies, he's buried, and somehow they forget where he's buried. I don't know quite how they work this out. But anyway, they claim that in 1603 or thereabouts, they rediscovered his tomb. And they found a scroll which told them all about how he'd done this and the story of the founding of their order, and that they should now go public. Well, of course, this is probably all a myth. You understand that. We're talking about not necessarily an actual person or an actual group. If we are, nobody knows exactly who they were. But it's an archetype, and it explains a lot. And one of the things I want you to see, this is a later publication, came out in 1618, showing the Rosicrucian College as a movable building. And what I want you to see, first of all, is that it's suspended from the hand of God. And it travels around. Now, this is actually telling you about how esoteric schools work. Everyone wonders, where did Gurdjieff get his knowledge? Where did Uspensky find it all out? Who instructed Madame Blavatsky? Well, I want to tell you something. These people may very well have visited places in Tibet, India, Persia, met intelligent, wise people, but that's not where they get it from. There are higher levels of consciousness and intelligence than us. There are angelic realms, as we were hearing earlier in Terry's lecture, that are only too willing to help and instruct us if we're willing to listen, if we're willing to give a footprint to what they would like to see accomplished on this planet. And that's why you see it being suspended from the hand of God. Because God himself, and I know a lot of you aren't believers, but don't think that when I say the word God, I mean an old man with a beard who points his finger out to Adam and passes that flash of life. I'm not talking like that. You've come from somewhere. Everything you see has come from somewhere. Something must be behind it. And I don't go along with the idea that a complex machine like the human body, even one cell of the human body, we could not replicate that in our laboratories. And I don't go along with the idea that this has somehow just evolved out of the mud over millions of years, willy-nilly. Something is guiding it. Something is guiding us. And that's something, we can call it God. I'm quite happy with the term. And it doesn't have connotations to me of an old man with a beard. Anyway, you can see that when the college appears, some people, they're blowing their trumpets, they're announcing themselves, and you can see here, over one of the doors is written, Venite Digni, which means, enter those of you who are suitable, those of you who are worthy. Come in. And some of the people respond. And you see one guy being winched out of a well. You can see another guy falling off a cliff. He's so knocked out by what he's seen. Well, that's how it seems to me. But other people are just walking past or riding past. They don't even notice that it's there. And that is the way of esoteric work, esoteric schools. And I want you to see something else here. That in the top left and top right-hand corners of that picture, there are stars. I'm going to use my little pointer thing here. One there and one there. And these two stars, one is shown next to a figure clutching a serpent, and he represents the constellation of Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. And the other one is next to the constellation of Cygnus, the swan. And the reason they're there is that in 1604, two stars appeared, what we would now call supernovae. They didn't have that term in those days. And they were recorded by Johannes Kepler. I mean, he was the astronomer of his time, the one who first worked out about the elliptical motion of the planets and worked out what we call Kepler's laws, which incidentally was the basis from which Isaac Newton was able to work out his laws of gravity. And that's another story. Anyway, these two stars appeared, and they saw these as being significant of the start of a new age. So it's written here in one of the pamphlets, God indeed hath already sent messengers which should testify to his will, to wit, some new stars which have appeared in Serpentarius and Cygnus. So these stars were kind of emblematic of the start of a new age, which we would now call the age of enlightenment. And what I would like to talk to you about today, though, is that we are living in an equivalent age when something even more spectacular has been happening with the stars, only we're even less conscious of it than they were. And before I go on, I just want to say that when we look at the Enlightenment now, you've got to understand that our world, as we know it now, is pretty much the product of 400 years of science. All the things that we do and have, so transformed by science. We don't have to ride around with donkey carts anymore. We have cars. We're able to fly in planes. We have the computers and the technology. All of that has come out of the Enlightenment. And the dark side of that, as we were hearing earlier, was that this has brought about materialism in our culture, we've become very materialistic, and we've also become very proud and arrogant about man's role and place in the universe when we can do so much. But that's not how they viewed it in the 17th century, and they would be appalled if they saw how we have misused that new knowledge which they were struggling to bring about. But we ourselves are living at what I would call the cusp of a new age. Now, different people have different arguments about when starts one age, when starts another, start of the age of Aquarius, the end of the age of Pisces, whatever. Doesn't really matter too much. We are living at the cusp of something very new, and there are signs in the sky which show us this in quite some detail, but they also link into ideas which we can trace back, going all the way to ancient Egypt. Now today, one of the prime signs of the turning of the age, as I see it, is that today the solstice sun, the summer solstice sun, is positioned exactly at a stargate. Now, I've been sort of giving a lot in my books about this, and also I hope some of you have been watching the lectures on EMTV. So I'm not going to go into all this in too much detail here, because it's on those lectures, and we haven't got time to cover everything that they cover. But the concept of the stargates is something which is very, very real and was known about by the ancients, not just in Europe and in Africa, but also the Mayan people in Mexico, which is staggering when you think about it. And the key is to understand what is happening today with the constellation of Orion. Word Orion basically means the rising one. Orionis, rising off, like Orient means the east, place of rising. And Orion was well understood and recognized by ancient peoples, the constellation of Orion. It's not something that we've invented in our modern times. And it marks out the passage of epochs, of long periods of time. And again, I've explained this in great detail in some of my other lectures. I'm not going to say too much about that. But as some of you probably know, I wrote a book, it came out in 1994, co-authored with Robert Bovell, called The Orion Mystery. And that was about the pyramids of Giza, and he had made some extraordinary discoveries, which, again, he had tried to bring these discoveries to the attention of the Egyptologists. And they had sort of said, on your bike, mate. They weren't interested in hearing about new ideas about pyramids. They think anyone who is investigating pyramids who doesn't reduce them to the basis level of just being a glorified tomb must be a pyramidiot. That's their term for it, a pyramidiot. So-called pyramidology, as Dr. Edwards would refer to it. But when you start looking at these buildings, these structures in some detail and depth, you have to think, well, there must have been a reason. These are the most extraordinary monuments on Earth. I think the Great Pyramid is still the most massive building ever built. 2.5 million tons of blocks of limestone carved out and piled one on the other to give a pyramid which gives you the proportions of pi, just for one thing. Anyway, what Robert discovered is that they represent the belt of Orion. And when you start looking at the overview of the pyramids, which of course I guess if you're an Egyptian you wouldn't see this because you didn't have aeroplanes. You could think about it. And you compare them with a photograph of Orion's belt, it seems fairly obvious. But you wouldn't believe, that even now, nobody's been able to disprove this theory. Our book, The Orion Mystery, became a #1 bestseller. And believe me, everyone wanted to have a pot shot at it. But they couldn't, because the evidence is irrefutable. It wasn't just that these pyramids looked like the arrangements like the stars of Orion's belt, but there were things like a shaft going out from the Great Pyramid, which points exactly at the culmination point of Orion's belt at the time the pyramids were built. That there are texts written on the walls in other later pyramids, talking about how the pharaoh wanted his soul to go to Orion. And you begin to see that this is a whole star culture. People who are intensely interested in the stars, but not just any old stars, very specifically the stars of Orion and Sirius. So the Orion mystery this is the Old Kingdom period. We're talking about 2,500 BC, roughly. These ideas may go back before then, but certainly they were very focused on Orion at that time. And then, in the zodiac of Dendera, it's actually not a zodiac, it's a sky map, but it has a zodiac in it, known as the zodiac of Dendera. This dates from the time of Cleopatra, around that period, much, much later. But there you can see Orion is shown there as a walking man with a staff. Yeah? There he goes. And he's sort of wearing a pharaoh's crown of Upper Egypt. Now, one of the important things about Orion, and this is something that I've been very interested in my work and writings, is that there's something very specific about it. You see here, I've marked here, Northern Stargate. And he raises his hand, or club, however you want to view it, up towards this point on the ecliptic. You see here, use my little pointer thing here. You see here the orange line that's running across. That marks the ecliptic. And that's the pathway of the sun. The sun moves roughly 1 degree a day, and it goes boom, 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 each day, moving 1 degree, and makes a whole circuit every year. It takes it 365 days and a quarter to make the entire circuit. And then you see here, this great bright area of stars is the Milky Way. And the Milky Way has an equator, the halfway line through it. It has polarity between the north and south, or I don't know if you would call it north and south, top and bottom of the equator, the disk. And the equator of the Milky Way runs right up and goes right through this position here, over the hand of Orion. So that crossroads in the sky is what the ancient people called a stargate, gate of heaven. And there are two. This is the northern one, and there is another one which is in Sagittarius, over the sting of Scorpio, in the southern skies. Now, the Egyptians and Western culture in general are most focused on this one. And something to know about these stargates, I like that term, stargate. I wish we could find one like they have in the films, you know. Wouldn't you like that? I mean, I'd love to go walking through the stargates and end up on a different planet. It'd be wonderful, wouldn't it? Anyway, but it's not that. That's not that. This is astronomy we're talking about. But they believed that when you're born, your soul would come in through one stargate and go out through the other. And then in some cultures, they believed that the soul would then, or whatever is the body of the soul, would walk around the Milky Way, leaving footprints behind it, to the other gate to come back in again, to reincarnate. You find a lot about that in a book called Hamlet's Mill. And if you haven't got it, I could really recommend you to get that book. Published in 1966, I think. It's still a classic on mythology and astronomy. So that's the position in the sky where the ecliptic crosses over the galactic plane. Now, I got this from, you've heard of Wallace Budge, former keeper of Egyptology at the British Museum. And his translations of the Book of the Dead are very well known, been published a long time. But I was very interested that he wrote here, "I open the door in heaven, I rule upon the throne." Right? It's one of the pieces in the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead is a collection of spells and hymns and so on to be said over the dead person to guide their soul through all the perils they're going to go through on the other side. The Egyptians were very big on that. Well, you look here at those hieroglyphs there, and you see a star there, and a bird, and this kind of oblong thing here. Well, the star is Spa in ancient Egyptian, and it means a star. And the bird there kind of gives you emphasis on that letter A, Spa. And then the enclosure, it means per, and it means a building or an enclosure or some place, and it's got an entrance. So he's translating this as star of the Spa enclosure, up, I open, and pet there, that says pet, and then that is also pet, heaven, a determinative. M, that owl figure there means in Egyptian. So he's actually saying, I open, and he calls it the door. I call it the Stargate. That's what it seems to say to me, the star entrance in heaven. So he's translating that actually from the Book of the Dead, the Papyrus of Ani, which you can go and see in the British Museum. So it's Sba, per. I translate it as a Stargate. This is New Kingdom, right? This is time of Ramesses and all those people. Luxor is the capital then. We go to the Middle Kingdom. So we've done Old Kingdom. Old Kingdom was the pyramids, representing the belt of Orion. We've looked at New Kingdom. Here we have the pyramidion of Amenemhet III. I always have tricky saying that, Amenemhet. This hieroglyph here, with the three uprights with kind of flags on them and a fourth upright lying down, that is Sahu, which means Orion. It can mean toes as well, apparently. Don't ask me the connection between Orion and toes. I've absolutely no idea. This is what you'll read, though, in Egyptology textbooks, dictionaries, what have you. But it has a determinative of this little figure here holding the star in his hand. And he's telling you that we're not talking about toes, we're talking about the constellation of Orion, Sahu. And that's actually on the pyramidion, which is also called a benben, which would sit on top of his pyramid, his Middle Kingdom pyramid. So we see there the figure, the walking figure of Orion. Again, he's got the staff, holding his hand out with a star on it. I believe that represents the Stargate that we were looking at before in the Book of the Dead. I mean, because we know that that's where a Stargate is. It's no invention on my part to say that. Suggests the Egyptians knew all about this. So Orion cups the Stargate in his hand, Middle Kingdom. And then we go to the sepulchral ceiling of Seti I. Now, he's the father of Ramesses II, the famous pharaoh who sort of built colossal statues of himself, Memnon, and you can go and sort of have a look at all those in big buildings all over Egypt. Well, his father was Seti I, and curiously, his sarcophagus, not this, but his sarcophagus is in London, I think it's the John Soane Museum, which is just off Kingsway, if you go to that part of London, Holborn, in there. Go there and have a look. It's made of alabaster, very rather nice. But he would be so surprised, I think, to hear that his sarcophagus, which was buried in the Valley of the Kings, ends up in this place called London. He's never ever heard of it, in this John Soane Museum, converted private house. I mean, it just shows you how bizarre history can be, doesn't it? Anyway, the sepulchral ceiling of Seti I shows you here on the bottom register there. These are all the star gods of the decans. Now, those of you who know a bit about astronomy, astrology, will know that there are 12 signs of the zodiac. Normally speaking, we think of 12 signs of the zodiac. But you can divide those signs, each one into 3 parts, which gives you 36 decans, each decan, deca meaning 10, 10 degrees. And what the Egyptians were interested in was what stars were coming over the horizon at what time. And each star that came over the horizon would be the ruler for 40 minutes, which is the period of rising of that decan. So they record these on the ceiling, and I'm not even going to attempt to go into an explanation of that, except for parts of it. And each one has its own god, its own star god of the decan. Some of them fortunate, some unfortunate. You have to make sacrifices to them. You know, it gets very complicated when you get into the whole baroqueness of late Kingdom Egypt, New Kingdom Egypt. And you can see here, just there, that says Seped, and it's a star. That's the star Sirius, or the Greeks call it Sothis. And over here you can see variant forms of Sahu. The sort of flag thing I was showing you becomes almost like sort of music notes here in these versions here. But they're saying that's the same hieroglyph, basically, and it's defining parts of the Orion constellation. And here you can see, on this one, that's the hieroglyph for Ast, which means Isis. So it's telling us that Isis is the star goddess connected with Seped, Sothis. And similarly speaking, we have here Asir, Osiris, connected with Orion, who's shown here in this little bark. So you've got Seped here, Sothis, riding in one bark. You've got Orion here, holding a key, or an ankh, to the star. You can see it in more detail. He's holding the key of life to the Stargate. Well, if you're going to have a gate in heaven, you need a key, don't you? It makes sense. So he's kind of like the key holder. And here you have another ceiling. This one is Senmut, who was the vizier of Queen Hatshepsut. And again, you've got a register of decans in hieroglyphs, and I'm not even going to begin to attempt to interpret most of them. But taking the detail here, you can see here, depicted on the sky map, you've got the southern branch of the Milky Way, shown as a pathway of stars running up here. You've got the Pleiades constellation, represented here in the form of an egg. You've got the Milky Way northern branch running up here next to Orion, which is true. If you look in the sky, we can't see it most of the time because of light pollution in our cities. But if you go out at sea or in a desert or someplace like that, and you look at the sky and you look at Orion, you'll see this great splashing of stars, the Milky Way, running up next to it. So I'm going to hurry through these last bits because we're running out of time, I'm told. Taking a bit more detail here, we have here hieroglyphs which say the throne of Orion, a throne put in Orion, and down here the family of Horus stars. That means family. That's Horus and stars. And then here we have the same thing, Osiris. So Osiris is in Orion, the family of Horus in Orion. And then we have this curious grouping of stars here, which shows that's how they represent in a hieroglyphic form the stars of Orion. And here we have the dust clouds shown in Orion in the middle portion of the star group. Well, curiously, there are great dust clouds in the middle portion of Orion, which is where stars are being born. How could they know this? Then going back on the other side, again we have the family of Horus. We have the eye of Horus. And that says Aret Ba, Retzba gateway star. And then here we have the goddess Sirius Isis. So these guys knew about this. Now, at the time of the summer solstice, in the year 2000, I took a group of people to Egypt to witness the sun positioned at the Stargate over the pyramid of Khafre in such a way, just as it's crossing in the east, exactly in the east, it's just at the right height in the sky to shine down the side of that pyramid. Extraordinary. We stood there, we were the only people there. And what makes it so interesting and extraordinary is that because of the precession of the equinox, the sun is now in that position at the summer solstice. It wasn't at the time they built the pyramids. This is a time-keeping position. It's an exact marker in the sky, the position where the ecliptic crosses over the plane of the Milky Way. It doesn't matter what the Earth does, that will be the same. You know, wobbling, turning over, going upside down. That's to do with the orbit of the Earth around the sun and the way that that is aligned with the Milky Way. So this doesn't matter if the Earth turned upside down 100 times in between, it's still going to be connected to that position. I just want to give you a little bit about the geometry of the Khafre pyramid. I won't take long on this. There's a whole lecture to do with all this you can have a look at. So today at the summer solstice, Orion appears to hold the sun like a torch at the summer solstice. And I call that the opening of the Stargate. Now, we have here, you can see it shown graphically. I don't know how clearly you can see that, but there you have the sun. And down here you can see the altitude, 53.2 degrees, which is almost exactly the slope of the Khafre pyramid. And it's crossing in the east. So you can imagine an invisible pyramid there with the sun sitting on top. And it does it twice, in the morning, and then in the afternoon it does it the other side. And we recorded both of these. You can actually get a disc. We've got the disc here of the opening of the Stargate tour, which takes you right through all this, actually filmed on location in Egypt and in Israel, where the second part of it takes place. But we haven't got time to go into that too much. Now, the Mayans also knew about the Stargates. Here you can see the destruction of the world by a flood, the end of the age. And this symbol here actually represents the Stargate over Orion. And just as the key to our understanding of the Bible prophecies for the end of times is to be read in the stars of the northern hemisphere, so conversely, the Mayan prophecy for the end of our age is in the southern Stargate. And the sun will be aligned with that on this day when their calendar runs out, actually aligned with the southern Stargate. So you can see here the summer solstice Stargate, June the 21st, and the winter solstice southern Stargate. The one is at the cusp between Taurus and Gemini, and the other is the cusp between Scorpio and Sagittarius. You can see it again, the alignment of the Earth at the end of times, as I call it. And the southern Stargate is located very close towards the center of the Milky Way galaxy. It's not exactly on it. The galaxy is not exactly on, the center of the galaxy is not exactly on the ecliptic. But you can get an idea here of what we're looking at. You see Orion there, the summer solstice, and the winter solstice alignment with the center of the galaxy. And there's something else I want to point out to you that's very, very important here. That is that you've got the center of the galaxy, if you like, represents the higher logos, the core of the galactic eminence of which our sun is right out on the edge. It's up here, two-thirds of the way out. Our sun is quite an insignificant star compared with some of the giant stars and the many millions and millions of stars in the galaxy. So Orion, the position of Orion and over the hand of Orion is directly opposed to the center of the galaxy. So in a sense, it represents the direction of escape from this galaxy, not just this constellation, not just our solar system, but our galaxy, out of the realm of stars. And when you look at the pictures that you get in alchemical books and so forth from the 17th century, they very often show you the circle of the fixed stars. Well, we would be better off thinking of that circle as representing the galaxy level of being, of starness. What lies beyond that? Bring us back a bit nearer, perhaps, to the unformed world above and beyond creation. So we've got these two links. The one is the opening of the northern stargate, which, again, I've written a lot about this in my books, and it's on these DVDs. You can see a lot more about this. But it represents, in a sense, the escape point from the Milky Way. So the invisible college is being manifested at this time, the time of the opening of the stargates, which is quite a short period of time. Because of the precession of the equinox, this is not going to be true for more than about another 20 years or so. And its mission of the Invisible College, as I view it, is to help in the preparation for the forthcoming changes signified by signs in the sky as applicable to our own times. Now, why did I sort of think I have the right to do this, to set up something like this? Well, I'll tell you why. I don't see anybody else doing it. And I think it's a very, very important thing. And the curious thing is that I decided I was going to set up this Invisible College on the internet a couple of years ago. And then one of these amazing synchronicities, I ended up coming along to Edge Media to talk about something else and talk to Keith about this. I said, why didn't we do a series on this, the Invisible College? And yeah, why not? It's a great idea. So we actually have now got the first ever esoteric school on the internet and on TV ever in history in the world. So what does this mean? What does this mean for you? First of all, it's intended to be a framework of support. I get letters from people all over the world. I get letters from people in Mongolia, Bolivia, lots from Australia, Canada, USA, Germany. People write to me. They've read my books. They found my website. They write to me. But they're often very isolated. They're living in a farm in Kansas or something. All their friends are chewing straw and just getting drunk every night. And they want to talk about stargates. They want to talk about the mysteries of, the pyramids. And they've got no one to talk to. We're providing a forum for that, just like Edge is providing a forum on TV for people to do things. So we're doing that. These are three major questions that we all need to ask ourselves. We're taught by the media, BBC One, ITV, all we're good for is kicking a football around and getting drunk on a Friday night and then feeling guilty about it afterwards. That's all we're good for. And when you get old, you're just a tiresome nuisance. That's kind of what our civilization has boiled itself down to. Well, I don't believe that. What are we? Well, we're sons of daughters of God for a start. And we have a potential in us to become angels. We have a potential in us to be illuminated beings. Churches were meant to help us do that. The trouble is, they get caught up in their big hats and their nice frock coats and, holding your ring out to be kissed. They get caught up in all that, and they forget that all that church is for is to be a vehicle. And I was saying this to the Swedish guys on TV yesterday. It's like if you imagine a bus, and the bus has got no wheels on it. And some people are carried out from the bus dead, and other people get on thinking it's going to take them to their destination. It's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere unless they fix the bus, put wheels on, put some petrol in the tank, and drive it. So we have to do it for ourselves. We can't rely on those guys. Can't rely on the Archbishop of Westminster, of Canterbury, the Pope. Can't rely on them because they don't dare do anything. We have to do it for ourselves. And that was, I think, one of the other messages, is that you have it in you to make your own connections. There's a whole angelic realm up there, spirit guides, people that knew you in your past lives, maybe living in the lower levels of that, higher angels who have a better vision about where things are meant to go. They're willing to help you. The illuminated saints and sages of the past, they're here willing to help us because they know damn well that this is a very important time on this earth. And if we can make this transition, we can make it work, we can create a completely different society for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. Now, Isaac Newton said that he had scratched around in the sand and he had found a few gems. I feel the same way. I've scratched around for 40 years. I've found a few gems. I've had some esoteric experiences myself. Been out of my body, I've been taken to places and seen things. I know some of you have probably had the same thing. All of you are capable of it. All of you, because you're human beings. So we all need to rise to the challenge. And that's our purpose. So how can you participate? Firstly, watch the programs. We've gone to a lot of trouble to make these programs, believe me. You know, driving around, I've been driving around the M25 in traffic jams going up the M1. The guys have been working really hard at EMTV. Please watch them. They're intended for you, and they're given for free on the TV. Or you can buy the DVDs of the programs. If you haven't got Sky, if you want to catch up, you want to watch them at your own speed. Now, they've got them downstairs, and I'm just going to tell you here. They're selling the individual programs at £6 each, and then half of those programs, there's 12 of them in all, have never been shown yet, so you'd be ahead of the game if you get hold of copies. But you can get the whole set for £40. And, you know, that's pretty good, isn't it? You can hardly get a Hollywood movie for that. And could change your life. Anyway, I end a commercial. I'll just tell you, you can get 4 programs for 20. I'm not involved in the selling of these things. There's also the Stargate trip I was telling you about. They got DVDs of that for £10, but if you buy any of the other DVDs, they're selling now at £7.50. And you find that great fun. I hope we're going to organize another Stargate trip, maybe next year. We're talking about it if there's enough people interested. And the other thing you can do, you can join the college. If you've got an internet connection, I'm sure most of you have, www.theinvisiblecollege.net. And I've put leaflets on every chair, so it's on there. So go and have a look at the website. It only costs you £10 a year, which is nothing. And we're only charging that because we need a bit of organizational money to make the whole thing work. So go and have a look. It's not a cult. Yeah, we're not trying to sell you hairspray or things to make you live forever. Well, it will make you live forever, actually, if you transform yourself. Yeah, but there's no fish oil, there's snake oil, there's nothing like that. Yeah, this is for you. And I hope that those of you who've been working on things privately will contribute and share your wisdom and knowledge with us, and also give support. Because I get people who come to me who are often in very difficult psychological states themselves, and they need to know that they're not alone. So we've got about 70 members already. I'd like to see half of you join, all of you if you want. And let's make this thing really huge and make an impact in the world to fight back against those common purpose idiots who are trying to turn us all into slaves. Yeah? So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. I hope you've enjoyed the lecture, and I hope you're going to enjoy the lectures that are still to come. And I know this one, they've taped it, and they're going to copy it very quickly as well, if you want to take it home as a souvenir. Thank you again.